From the Venice rooftops to the shores of Nassau, the Assassin's Creed is whispered from ear to ear. The long-kept words of a secret order, founded during the fall of Egypt to the Romans, forged into its current form at the height of the Crusades, has at its core three tenets. The first: no woman must be the protagonist of an Assassin's Creed game unless a male character is also playable. The second: in the event that there is a female playable character, she must not appear on any of the official art or the marketing material, to the point of Ubisoft appearing ashamed of the truth. The third: this suppression of women must be put into practice, both in the games and in the real world. Ubisoft, the true creators of the Creed, knew well that it wasn't enough to fight against female representation at every opportunity in their art, but to truly practice what they preached. They needed to mistreat and harass their female staff and actively cover it up. With these tenets in hand, the assassins knew their order was in safe hands. No woman would ever be allowed to touch the franchise without a male face preceding her, and thus an order was born that would last 2,000 years. And about that many games, and through all of those years, and all of those series entries, the Creed remained strong, and its central maxim proud. That maxim is, nothing is true, everything is permitted. Except for women-centric games, and treating women with respect. That's not permitted. Everything is permitted, except for that. Got it? Good. Okay, you're ready to work for Ubisoft. So, what was all that about? Well, I'm glad you asked. Assassin's Creed, you see, is a historical science fiction video game series in which some boring-ass person from our time lies down on a magic lounge chair and instead of simply falling asleep and waking up with a bad back, goes backwards in time, because in this sci-fi bullshit universe the game is created, your DNA has memories of your ancestors that you can just play like a video game, learning their skills and lives until they start giving you literal brain damage. Yes, this really happens. For the most part, the Assassin's Creed series revolves around two opposing factions, based on the historical assassins and Templars of the Crusades era, who fight in various historical settings for freedom versus order, as an excuse for you to play in various historical periods and do fun things in your ancestor's body, like pegging Alcibiades in ancient Greece, becoming BFFs with Karl Marx in Victorian London, or joining in the Ides of March just to feel part of the moment. You know, everyone else got to stab Julius Caesar, why can't I do it? And, doing the most important part of any journey to the past, parkour. The Vatican climbed it, the Great Pyramid of Gazebo. Great Pyramid of Gazebo. The Great Pyramid of Giza climbed it. The Colosseum climbed it. You can climb anything, pretty much. And that just makes it all the more annoying when the only thing for miles around in every direction is just an endless sea of collectibles that more or less add nothing to the game, but that's the nature of the beast. I won't pretend I didn't collect all the feathers in Assassin's Creed 2, because of course I did. Sea shanties? You bet your ass I'm gonna get all the sea shanties. I need to hear my tone-deaf pirate crew sing, goddammit.
Those boys are all in the pond to be rollicking randy dandy, oh. Heave up, oh, heave away, way, hey, roll and go. The anchor's on board and the cable's all scored to be rollicking randy dandy, oh.
Besides all that, Assassin's Creed as a series has a woman problem. For the majority of the games, there have only been male protagonists, and when confronted about this fact, the series' studio, Ubisoft, began to spiral into a controversy that took them from looking stupid and incompetent to looking sexist to the point of being openly misogynistic, to multiple Ubisoft executives being arrested for serious sexual crimes against their female employees. So, yeah, that's a big dive. And you're frankly lucky that I'm here to deliver it to you. Me, Brigitte Empire, science and culture correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, the only newspaper in Britain that is staffed entirely by Templars. Until now. So you might have heard that there's a new installment in the Assassin's Creed series out now. Interestingly, and I don't know how coordinated this was, It came out exactly the same week several former Ubisoft executives saw the inside of a French jail cell. I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but regardless, Assassin's Creed Mirage is the 13th mainline game in the Assassin's Creed series, and I say mainline because it looks a lot like Ubisoft don't want us to count Assassin's Creed Liberation, which featured the series' first female protagonist, and only black protagonists unless you count the Black Flag DLC where you play as Adewale, Aveline de Grand Pré. Now, you can come fight me about this if you want, but given AC Liberation was built as a spin-off for 3 in exactly the same way as Black Flag, the 4th official entry was, and yet it isn't considered its equal in terms of standing in the series, especially given the critical reception Aveline as a character received, something there feels a little sus. In a manner similar to Assassin's Creed Liberation and Black Flag, Assassin's Creed Mirage began as extra content for Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and is a prologue of sorts to Valhalla, following the character of Basim, who is a major player in Valhalla. Despite this, we don't get to play a gender-bent Basim, which you might think would be obvious. Basim is a canon character after all, we saw him in Valhalla. He's a dude, that's fine, right? Well, the main character of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Eivor, is canonically supposed to be a woman, but you can play her as a dude if you so wish due to some video game bullshittery about Odin inhabiting a body, to justify your choice, which I, in my infinite naivety, just assumed would be the same way until the end of the series. Like, this would be the status quo from now on. Choosing a gender, not so much. Not only did Eivor not get to stand on her own, but when Valhalla was announced, it was unclear whether you'd be able to play as a female character at all. All of the marketing and art, from the trailers to the posters to the cover of the game itself, pictured male Eivor, explicitly against the canon. And the first clues we got to the fact that we might be able to play as female Eivor was a statue you could get as a pre-order bonus if you spent $10,000 million bajillion on the game before any gameplay had been announced. You know, like an absolute fool. Animus Fragment 1, a 13th century story of the Danish histories by Saxo Grammaticus, telling of a great battle where women fought alongside men. Now, out of the town of Slay, under the captains Heta and Wisna, with Hakon Kuchi came Toby the sailmaker. On these captains, who had the bodies of women, nature bestowed the souls of men. The maidens I have named, in fighting as well as in courteous array, led the land forces to the battlefield. Then the trumpets sounded, and both sides engaged in a battle with all their strength. The sky seemed to fall suddenly on the earth, fields and woods to sink to the ground. All things were confounded, and old chaos come again. Heaven and earth mingling in one tempestuous turmoil, and the world rushing to universal ruin. For, when the spear-throwing began, the intolerable clash of arms filled the air with incredible thunder. The steam of the wounds suddenly hung a mist over the sky. The daylight was hidden under the hail of spears. Wounds suddenly hung a mist over the sky. The daylight was hidden under the hail of spears. The help of the slingers was of great use in the battle, but when the missiles had been flung from hand or engines, they fought with swords or iron-shod maces, and it was now, at close quarters, that most blood was spilt. Then the sweat streamed down their weary bodies, and the clash of the swords could be heard afar. The previous game in the series had a similar issue. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is set in ancient Greece, and follows the adventures of Cassandra, a legendary mercenary with a heart of gold and the soul of a disaster bisexual. Unless you believe the marketing, which insists on showing you the much less interesting Alexios, her shithead brother who canonically becomes some evil meathead after being stolen as a child and raised by a cult. Alexios is on the game's cover, in all of the marketing, and for all of that, Cassandra was the standout and the canon choice, for whatever that's worth. Do you see why I was surprised that Mirage didn't offer me a Rule 66 Basim yet? Well, on top of that, I've been seeing the amount of people calling Mirage a return to form, and you can see why I'm having weird feelings about this move. On one hand, Black Flag is one of my favourite games, not just of the series, but of all time, and if this sprouted organically out of love for the character and setting in the same way, I'm sure it'll be an excellent game. It's getting great reception, and I've played every Assassin's Creed game so far and enjoyed most of them. Unity can get in the bin completely. It's a complete waste of an incredible setting, and has the cardinal sin of having its unplayable secondary character be infinitely more interesting than its bland carbon copy of Ezio male protagonist. And honestly, Revelations and Three Walls also both drags at times. Anyway, cards on the table, I will play this game, and I will probably love it. But as much as I know intellectually the return to form comments are referring to the return to the Middle Eastern setting of the first game, the shorter story, the smaller map, the lack of bloated RPG elements, yeah, okay. But there's also no female protagonist, and that, unfortunately, does leave a sour taste in my mouth. Not that we need a female protagonist in every game, but since the vast majority of AC entries have had a solo male protagonist, and not a single one, since we're not apparently counting Liberation, has had a solo female protagonist, it does feel a little bit like Ubisoft are looking over their shoulders and thinking, are the critics gone now? Can we get back to what we were doing before? When the argument about the lack of female protagonists in Assassin's Creed games goes all the way back to Unity, where, as I mentioned before, a really interesting female secondary character made a lot of people suspect she was originally intended to be the game's protagonist, especially since the character that ended up being the protagonist in Unity looked just like Ezio, everyone's favourite character from Assassin's Creed 2 through Revelations, except this guy had no personality and basically contributed absolutely nothing to the story throughout his own bloody game. In the years since, developers have been open about the higher-ups at Ubisoft, the company who develops the series, preventing them from having female protagonists, and encouraging some pretty sexist shit in general, including harassment against their female employees that have actually led to arrests within the company. We'll get to that. But just to say, from the words of the people that made the games themselves, this could have been the case. In fact, Unity had a co-op mode, which began with including a female avatar, until that was dropped, giving us the frankly incredible and literally unbelievable quote, trying to explain why they couldn't possibly animate playable women in the game, despite people on the internet managing to turn their female game models into playable characters in just a few hours of their own free time. You will always see yourself as the game's revolutionary hero. Ah, no. Apparently, while friends who join your game appear as other customizable male assassins. Alexa Mancio, creative director at Ubisoft Montreal, which employs over 2,600 people, told Polygon the decision was down to a lack of resources. It's double the animations, it's double the voices, all that stuff and double the visual assets, he said. Especially because we have customizable assassins. It is really a lot of extra production work. Because of that, the common denominator was no. It's not like we could cut out our main character, so the only logical option, the only option we had, was to cut the female avatar. This, you might imagine, led to much ridicule. The idea that female characters are just so difficult to animate is laughable and was demonstrated to be so. Apparently, however, this wasn't just a slip-up. Current and former Ubisoft employees in recent years have been pretty open about the sexist culture at the company, both in terms of its art and its attitude towards its employees. Originally, for example, Assassin's Creed Syndicate, the first game to let you play as both male and female protagonists, the twins Jacob and Evie Fry, originally gave equal screen time to both characters, but managers at the company insisted on scaling this back, insisting that female characters do not sell games, despite fucking Tomb Raider being one of the most famous video game franchises of all time. Until you were left playing as Jacob Fry for the majority of the game, a man with the personality of a single plank of wood. Whereas Evie, she's classy, but she's dangerous. She's got a cane that's also a sword. She's cool as fuck. The fucking inventor of the telephone, he's trying to bang her, but she's too good for him. But her brother, I think he wants to form a gang? That's all I can remember about him. And since they're both British, they get massive marks down as protagonists by default, so that puts him as like -10 out of 10? Just above Arno, I suppose, whose game is less fun, has a shitter story, spends the entire French Revolution doing nothing about the revolution and just masturbating about what it means to be an assassin until out of the blue he has to kill Robespierre. Also, he's French, so shittier. In fact... Okay, so I've taken a short sojourn into Tier List Town to bring some levity before things get real depressing. I've used Tier Maker to rank all the mainline Assassin's Creed protagonists, not including Desmond or Layla, who was just regular people, would end up in C tier probably, and not including Aveline because she wasn't on the list that I was using on the website, but she would be up in B tier. Adewale would be at A if you count Freedom Cry because he's just fucking incredible. So obviously Arno gets his own tier because he's easily the worst of the bunch. Not only is completely unlikable, comes from the shittiest game, and just look how smug this fucking guy is. But he's also personal friends with fucking Napoleon Bonaparte, and joins his army to spread Bonapartism across Europe down the barrel of a gun after assassinating my boy Robespierre. So yeah, very freedom of him. Also, he's French. Above French tier is D tier, which holds all of the genuinely unlikable characters. Hatham and Shay are basically fascists, but Hatham gets booted lowest in this tier because he's just very grating. Plus you have to play as him in Assassin's Creed 3 a bunch, and those sections are dull as sin. Alexios, people will probably disagree with, but I find his voice very grating, and I love Cassandra so much he just feels wrong. I can't stand to look at him, so he goes here. Sorry guys. Jacob is next because he's English. Sorry lads. More seriously, he takes a bunch of screen time away from his much more interesting sister, and his sections in Syndicate being confirmed as being forced on the players by management, it's just bad vibes all round. Connor and Altair are in C tier. They're fine. They can be a little dull, but they work most of the time. I have very few opinions about them as characters. Now B tier I'm sticking Basim based on his character in Valhalla, so we'll see if my opinion changes when I play Mirage. But I loved Basim in Valhalla, even with the weird body horror feelings I got from his role in the ending of the game. Evie is here too, because as much as I enjoy her story in Syndicate and her design, the games the other characters are from all just have much better stories than Syndicate, so they have a lot more to work with. A tier was a hard one, and I would genuinely consider this a 4-maybe 3-way tie. Bayek suffers a little from being the main character in a game with Aya, his wife, who is incredible. But he's great in his own way, so he borders on B tier for me, but he just edges it out into A. Eivor, male or female, is an amazing character. No notes. Cassandra is my favourite disaster bisexual mercenary with a heart of gold, and Edward is just fantastic. He gets away with a demoted because British rule because he's Welsh, and therefore not as bad. He has the opposite problem to Bayek as well, because he has an incredible cast in this game. Half the major figures from the golden age of piracy, basically. And while with Bayek that sort of drags him down somehow, with Edward it sort of lifts him up. The way that he plays against these characters really makes him stronger in my opinion. S tier is obviously going to include Ezio because, of course, he's the best, and my girl Aya. Aya is... Every time I got to play Aya in Origins, I was standing up and cheering. And as little as she is available to play, when she is, you're in for some of the best parts of the game, including some incredible set pieces and massive story beats. I was honestly really pissed that we couldn't play as Aya more, if only just for the post-game when you're running around the map. In fact, playing as just her from the beginning would have felt really satisfying, and I guess I'm not the only one in thinking that, because the people making Assassin's Creed Origins wanted her to be the main protagonist too. Originally, Bayek was going to die early on in the game, in a mirror of the classic hero's wife dies and gives him purpose trope, but that would mean no man on marketing, despite Aya having been foreshadowed as a protagonist way back in Assassin's Creed 2. So, instead, we get everyone's favourite part, the commodification of art. Compromising the artist's vision because management is convinced people will only spend money on a game if they can imagine that under those assassin's robes is a big swinging hog. I mean, they could have had a trans woman protagonist if they want that so bad, but something tells me that the same execs that hate the idea of people playing as women in their products wouldn't be so keen on the transgenders being a playable option either. Just to make it clear what's happening here, let me quote some actual sources. In 2017's Assassin's Creed Origins, you play as Egyptian warrior Bayek, with control occasionally transferring over to his wife Aya for side missions. However, according to the developers who spoke to Bloomberg, at one point in development, Bayek was to be seriously injured or killed off early in the game, with the focus switching to Aya as the sole lead, but that was dropped in favour of making Bayek the lead character. The trend continued with the series' next major entry, 2018's Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Originally Cassandra was due to be the only playable character, with her brother Alexios featuring as a non-player character. However, multiple developers on the project told Bloomberg that this wasn't an option, and instead the game was released with players given the choice to play the story as either Cassandra or Alexios. That original intent for Odyssey comes through in the game's tie-in novel, in which Cassandra is the canonical lead. However, following the game's announcement, Alexios was given prime place in the game's marketing materials. Initially, only he featured in all of the screenshots of the game's Steam page. He was the character of the game's trailer, and he featured on the game's Uplay header image and box art. In Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you play as a Viking warrior called Eivor. This character can be either male or female, and you can swap from one to the other at any point while playing the game. However, in the reveal trailer, first gameplay trailer, and in all the assets released as part of the announcement, the Eivor used is the male version of the character. It was only thanks to a collector's edition statue that we could see that there was a female version of Eivor. According to the developer speaking to Bloomberg and other Ubisoft alumni on Twitter, These directives to include male alternatives or minimize the role of female characters came from Chief Creative Officer Sergei Haskowet and the marketing department, who believed female protagonists would not sell games. Of course, I completely understand why players couldn't just play as Cassandra or Aya, and instead had to play as the much more interesting and not at all imposed on from above and less interesting characters of Alexios and Bayek. After all, games with female protagonists, they just don't sell. Ask anyone, Tomb Raider? Never sold a single copy. The Last of Us? Never heard of it. Metroid? A flop. Horizon Zero Dawn? More like Horizon $0, am I right?
These women are unlike any other you'll meet. A force, and the only ones there with any smarts.
Animus Fragment 2. A Tale of Sinani. Half-sister of Alexander the Great, from the 2nd century words of Polonius and his translations. Sinani, the daughter of Philip, was famous for her military knowledge. She conducted armies, and in the field charged the head of them. In an engagement with the Illyrians, she with her own hand slew Caria, their queen, and with great slaughter defeated the Illyrian army. Unable to seize the throne for herself, she decided to arrange a sword-point wedding between her daughter and the puppet king Philip Arrhidaeus, who was Sinani's half-brother. Sinani mobilized her troops and headed towards the imperial capital at Babylon. Perdiccas sent an army, headed by one of Alexander's generals, to stop her at the Macedonian border. She defeated him at the Strymon River, now the Struma, and crossed into Asia. Perdiccas sent a second army against her, led by his own brother, Alcetas, who grew up with Sinani. Perdiccas seems to have believed facing a childhood companion at the head of an opposing army would be enough to change Sinani's mind. It didn't. Also, remember that excuse I read to you earlier about female characters being too time-consuming to animate? Well, it turns out the animation art director for Assassin's Creed 3, Jonathan Cooper, said making female characters would be a day or two's work, and later was told that people at the studio could get female characters ready to play in under 1 hour. Apparently, and I'm quoting here, the decision to nix female playable characters came from Paris editorial alone. You see, this is why the French get their own shit here. Fuck you, Arno. I hope you and Napoleon are happy together at the bottom of the fucking sea. In response to these findings, well, not just these findings, in response to these findings and the extensive allegations of sexual harassment made against a senior Ubisoft executive, multiple executives left their positions along with other high-level staff. These allegations cover a decade and only saw the light thanks to the Me Too movement, finally giving women the momentum and the bravery they needed to stand up and be heard. The accused, primarily Haskowet, founded and edited the editorial department, so you can imagine what the climate of the company was towards its female staff. And that seems to have leaked through to their products. These allegations are genuinely horrific, and those at the top absolutely both knew and covered it up. This is a company with a systematic hatred of women built into its core. It fundamentally does not view women as people worthy of respect. No wonder the editorial line of the company reflects a view of women as not having agency, of not selling, of not being worthy of being the protagonists in their own stories. To the highest paid people in Ubisoft, women were seen as objects, to be used and discarded. A frankly sickening state of affairs. And though you might think me connecting these two stories together is a bit of a stretch, it was confirmed that Haskowet was the main offender in preventing female protagonists from taking the lead time and time again, despite the wishes of the people actually involved in making these games. In this case, this truly was the attitude of a misogynist at the top, imposed on the entire company below him, a company that disregarded its female employees, and systematically worked to prevent women's stories being told, both in fiction and to the press. It was Haskowet that made the claim that women don't sell, despite obvious examples to the contrary. It was Haskowet that mandated Aya's role be reduced in Origins to the point where she went from being the sole protagonist to only playable in certain missions. It was Haskowet that minimized Evie Fry's role in her story. It was Haskowet that vetoed the original vision of Cassandra being the only playable character in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, insisting on shoehorning in a strong male lead. And it was Haskowet that abused women constantly in his position as an executive at Ubisoft, and made it a hostile work environment for women. This man was a predator with creative control, and he's but a symptom of a larger problem in the entire video game industry. There are open secrets like those that were told about Hasquet over the years throughout the entire video game industry, and the entertainment industry more largely. Thankfully, in the last 2 years, several of these open secrets have come to light, but in these large patriarchal capitalist companies, you don't rise to the top of the business by being a good person or by loving video games, but instead by being the most ruthless at raising profits for shareholders. This is not an environment that fosters kindness and equality of the sexes, and this actively endangers the art form it produces. By seeing games as a product, a simple commodity to sell, rather than works of art, you perpetuate a corporate culture of sharks, each bragging about how many employees they are willing to fire, how many corners they are willing to cut, how much they will corrupt any creative vision that will ultimately result in less money going into shareholder pockets. This has got to stop. Indie studios have a lot more goodwill with their fan bases than the big studios for similar reasons as to why people actively despise giant corporate entities like Ubisoft or EA, but even most of them are run as businesses. What we need is to decommodify the video game sector and treat games as art first and foremost, instead of making art as a side product of producing a commodity. Fuck profits, make art. Fuck shareholders, share your vision, but for now, that's just a pipe dream. As sad as it makes me, it's very hard to make art for a living, especially stuff that's as large, time-consuming, and collaborative as making video games. And in our current society, we need money, unfortunately, to live. People can't make art for art's sake. Otherwise, they won't be able to eat. But shouldn't they be able to? Are we maybe just going about art wrong? Have we maybe built our society a bit wrong? A bit inhuman? Should we not be encouraging people to make art instead of incentivizing people not to do it by making it practically impossible to be a full-time artist if you're not already coming from money? Why should the ability to create art without pandering to shareholders be limited to the rich? Is art not part of what makes life worth living? I wonder if you feel the same. Instead, we have people like Hasquet, described as the creative force at Ubisoft. Sergei Hasquet could essentially make, break, or change any game on a whim. A French newspaper named Libération accused Hasquet of toxicity, misogyny, homophobia, and even drugging people with marijuana-infused food without them knowing. The allegations seemingly go all the way through Ubisoft, from executives to developers to the HR department, all being named as responsible for cultivating an abusive working environment. In the end, these allegations proved so serious, they resulted in the arrest of 5 former Ubisoft executives by French police following a year-long investigation into the epidemic of sexual assault and harassment in the video game giant. French newspaper Libération reported that 3 were arrested yesterday, with another 2 placed in custody today. Among those arrested are former Chief Creative Officer Sergei Hasquet and ex-VP of Editorial and Creative Services Tommy Francois. Both left the publisher in summer 2020 following allegations of widespread abuse, harassment, and discrimination within Ubisoft, including claims against the 2 executives. The arrest followed complaints by the Solidaires Informatique Union and 2 victims in the summer of 2021. It is being handled by the Public Prosecutor's Office in Bobigny, district of Paris. Speaking to Libération, the plaintiff's lawyer, Maud Becker, said the case goes beyond individual behaviour and reveals systemic sexual violence. This news came out on October the 4th, 2023, 3 days ago at the time of writing this. More, I'm sure, will be revealed as time goes on, but for now, we should note that very rarely do sexual assault claims ever go to court. The fact that multiple very rich executives of a huge company have been arrested, by the French of all people. Maybe I was wrong about Arno. Anyway, it reveals just how deep the problem went, how convincing and solid the evidence was, how obvious and undeniable the problem of institutional sexism or vehement misogyny was at Ubisoft. Since these allegations originally came out, I have felt strange playing the Assassin's Creed games I've beaten time and time again and loved. I'll always love this series, No matter what happens, my memories of playing Assassin's Creed 2, Brotherhood, Black Flag, Odyssey will never go away. My wonder at the ending of Assassin's Creed 1, Assassin's Creed 2 being the first game I ever got all the achievements on, sailing around the ocean just to hear my crew sing sea shanties in Black Flag, beating weeks in surgery recovery while it poured down with rain outside, exploring the gorgeous shorelines of ancient Greece in Odyssey. Nothing can take those memories away, but when I play them now I know what went on behind the scenes, I can't help but thinking about the hours put into making this gorgeous piece of art by people who were hurting, by people whose creativity was stifled by not just overreaching management, but actual sexual predators, by people who were being abused, by people who didn't feel they could speak out of fear of losing their jobs, or by encouraging further harassment or assault. It makes my blood run cold. As much as Ubisoft insists it's a different company now, is it? There's a lot of the same people still at the top, the same people that cover this stuff up. All the same corporate structures, albeit rejiggered a little, are in place. And once again, on a much less important note, we have a sole male protagonist. While some of the most prominent abusers have been taken by the police, I do worry they've just been the ones to take the fall. And, as the French police alluded to, that the problem runs much deeper, and Ubisoft may yet still be a place that fundamentally discriminates and harms women. And, well, you may have gotten through all that and still left thinking, yeah, well, obviously what Hasquet did was awful, and his influence on the company's creative decisions was probably bad. But fundamentally, even if his reasons for not including women were wrong, he was right not to include them? Right? After all, Assassin's Creed is a historical fiction series. It's set in the past, and women couldn't do shit in the past, right? Well, no. That's wrong, actually. Our current view of world history is rooted in the strict sexism of the Victorian era, and even though, yes, a lot of societies in the past were pretty sexist, they weren't sexist in the same way that we think about sexism. Different cultures all had different attitudes to sex and gender, and throughout society, from those societies that revered women all the way to those that oppressed them deeply, women still existed in those societies. Women still had agency. Even in the deeply patriarchal society of Rome, you had powerful women behind the scenes moving pieces around. They couldn't be emperors, but they sure as hell acted like them. Not to mention the situation outside the city walls, among the peasantry, where most people lived. Yes, most Vikings might have been male, but there were shield maidens. There were absolutely female warriors in every war you can name. Yes, the Middle Ages did have a lot of church-ordained sexism, but people like Joan of Arc, Hildegard of Bingen, Eleanor of Aquitaine, and many more had amazing and prolific lives that we still know about today. Those are just the ones that we know about, that survived from this sexist society. Think about all the women whose stories weren't written down. Women are over half the population. Even if most of them lead boring lives, some of them will be doing amazing things we'd love to hear about. Hell, most men aren't knife-wielding assassins either. Most men just work in some office and then go home and watch football and fart a bit until they fall asleep. I assume. Probably. I don't live with men anymore. But I did grow up with two brothers and a dad, to be fair, and they did do a lot more than watch football and fart. But they have been known to do both. Sometimes at the same time. Animus Fragment 3. Incoming transmission about French revolutionary Pauline Léon, co-founder of the Society of Revolutionary and Republican Women. Léon is most remembered for her militancy and enthusiasm for taking action, often violent, to defend the revolution against the tyranny of the monarchy. Her father's death as a young girl left her in charge of helping her mother raise her 5 siblings and runs a family business of making chocolate. This is the natural consequence of instilling Léon with an independence and confidence that brought her into direct conflict not only with the more moderate liberals — she had a visceral hatred of the Marquis de Lafayette, for example — but with the traditional views on how women should be allowed to behave. Leon was born into a lower middle-class family, and her father had taught her to read, a rarity for someone of her situation, and influential in her increased awareness of Parisian politics. However, unlike more circumspect saloniers, Leon was a fille sans-culotte who wanted to be in the fray, carrying her pike, literally fighting for the revolution. So, you might have noticed by now that these animus fragments are actually trying to tell us something about the background noise behind this story. Behind the patriarchal attitudes of Ubisoft's management, behind the decentering of women in their own stories, behind the abuse of women in the workplace and subjugation of them, their treatment as second-class citizens, is the notion that women are not equal to men. They haven't been conscious actors in their own histories, that they have always and inevitably been playing the role of the housewife, the mother, always at home, always quiet, never making history happen, with today being abhorrent because it's so different. And that's obviously false, right? What I've tried to demonstrate here with just a few examples from similar periods to those that the games with the most controversial decisions on gender in the Assassin's Creed series come from, is that women have always been active agents in human history. I mean, obviously. Even the most misogynistic of you must admit, when faced with the evidence before you, and the mountains of other profiles besides, I wasn't picking for scraps here, there were thousands of profiles to choose from, that, well, women were always there. Women were always part of organizations that they weren't even supposed to be a part of. Never mind the ones that they were, women have always been on the front lines, both when they were welcomed, and when the ancient equivalents of upper management tried to banish them. Women haven't just been absent from history from the day humans first learned to use tools until the suffragettes came in and made women protagonists in the human story. Women have always been around, always had their own motives, agency, reasons for existing, and yes, they have always fought. I choose those words on purpose here. I think quite a lot when I'm reading about this stuff, about an essay by sci-fi author Cameron Hurley, appropriately titled We Have Always Fought from May 2013, which, if I recall correctly, won a Hugo. So, you know it's not just me that it resonated with. In the essay, Cameron Hurley describes a conversation she had with one of her professors while writing her master's thesis. When I sat down with one of my senior professors in Durban, South Africa, to talk about my master's thesis, he asked me why I wanted to write about women resistance fighters. Because women made up 20% of the ANC's militant wing, I gushed. 20%? When I found that out, I couldn't believe it. And you know, women have never been part of fighting forces. He interrupted me. Women have always fought, he said. What? I said. Women have always fought, he said. Shaka Zulu had an all-female force of fighters. Women have been part of every resistance movement. Women dressed as men and went to war, went to sea, and participated actively in combat for as long as there have been people. I had no idea what to say to this. I'd been nurtured in the US school system on a steady diet of the great men theory of history. History was full of great men. I had to take separate women's history courses just to learn about what women were doing while all the men were killing each other. It turned out many of them were governing countries and figuring out rather effective methods of birth control that had sweeping ramifications on the makeup of particular states, especially Greece and Rome. Half the world is full of women, but it's rare to hear a narrative that doesn't speak of women as the people who have things done to them instead of the people that do things. More often, women are talked about as a man's daughter, a man's wife. This sudden realization is the same one I just tried to hit you with there. Yes, many societies in our past have been massively patriarchal, even misogynistic, but women have still been there. Women don't just go away when you stop treating them equally. Women are always around, and they always have agency. They don't have to listen to your societal rules, and just as often they might choose to break them. And even if most don't, some, just law of large numbers wise, will. We have always fought. Of course we have. The world is a big place. A society isn't a single man and a single woman you can make stay quiet and stay indoors. Societies are big and complicated and messy, and sometimes things just don't go the way those at the top want or expect them to. People break the law. People make their own rules. People choose to live as outlaws. People cheat the system. People fight to change the system. People become exceptions in rigid hierarchies. A lot of things happen in history because it's a long time with a lot of people in a lot of places. And if we don't hear about these women, just remember, we only know the things that were written down or that our archaeology has uncovered. How many women were notable enough that their largely male scribes of history would feel the need not to ignore them and instead write their stories down? How many women have died not in rich burial grounds filled with jewels, but out in the woods, their bones crunched by wolves and scattered to the wind, leaving no trace? Let's just put it this way. If you think there's a thing, anything, women didn't do in the past, you're wrong. Women, now and then, even made a habit of peeing standing up. They wore dildos. So even the things the funny haha folks immediately raise their hand to say like, it's impossible women did X, well, they did it. Intersex women and trans women too have fought and died, often misgendered and forgotten, in the ranks of history. And let's remember, when we speak about women and men as if these are immutable, somehow historical categories, there are those who have always lived and fought in the scenes between things. But none of those things fit our narrative. What we want to talk about are women in one capacity. Their capacity as wife, mother, sister, daughter to a man. I see this in fiction all the time. I see it in books and TV. I hear it in the way people talk. I spent 2 years in South Africa and another decade once I returned to the States, finding out about all the women who fought. Women fought in every revolutionary army I found. And those armies were often composed of fighting forces that were 20 to 30% women. But when we say revolutionary army, what do we think of? What image does it conjure? Does the force in your mind include 3 women and 7 men? 6 women and 14 men? Women not only made bombs and guns in World War II, they picked up guns and drove tanks and flew airplanes. The Civil War, the Revolutionary War. Point me to a war and I can point to an instance where a woman picked up a hat and a gun and went off to join it. And yes, Shaka Zulu employed female fighters as well. But when we say Shaka Zulu's fighters, what image do we conjure in our minds? Do we think of these women? Or are they the ones we don't see? The ones who, if we included them in our stories, people would say weren't realistic. Of course, we do talk about women who ran with Shaka Zulu. When I Google women who fought for Shaka Zulu, I hear all about his harem of 1,200 women, and his mother, of course. And this line was very popular. Women, cattle and slaves, one breath. It's easy to think women never fought, never led, when we are never seen. And this is why it is important to challenge these narratives. This is why Cassandra is important, why Aya is important, why Eivor and Evie and Aveline are important. The world is not a place where men make decisions and women sit at home and wait for the men to come home, and it never has been. The reason we think like this is because of the people who are telling these stories, and the underlying assumptions that women have no agency, have no stories to tell of their own, have no urges, no sense of freedom, of justice, no dreams, no goals. These are the assumptions that people like those recently arrested from Ubisoft make and want us to make. The myths they spread to make their behavior seem more acceptable. The less women are seen as protagonists in their own stories, the more they are seen as objects for the real protagonists, men, to interact with to further their own goals. But instead, women are people, and they always have been. And it's important now that we can articulate this, to tell these stories of women fighting, yearning, winning, losing, everything, because we have a lot of gaps left in our canon to fill, and a whole load of perspectives to add to make a complete tapestry of the human experience. Who knows, maybe one day your story will come out, and we'll tell it to each other with awe for generations, with wonder. Or not, and you'll be forgotten, like most people who have ever lived. But even if you never do anything that makes someone want to write a book about you, never let that make you believe that you're not important, that you don't matter. lots of amazing people, incredible innovators, world-changing individuals were not noted down in history, were forgotten through the ages. Writers are just people. They're not gods. And sometimes the best people disappear from history without a trace, remembered only by their family and friends, until they too fade from history. Are we left with just the impact they made? And that's enough. Animus Fragment 4, Emma Goldman, a woman at the forefront of revolutionary struggle. Emma Goldman was born in 1869 in a Jewish ghetto in Russia, where her family ran a small inn. When she was 13, the community suffered a wave of pogroms. The severe economic hardship of the time meant that Emma Goldman had to leave school after 6 months in St. Petersburg and work at a factory. It was here that Goldman secured a copy of Chernyshevsky's What's to Be Done, in which the heroine Vera lives in a world of equality between sexes and cooperative work. The book offered an embryonic sketch of Goldman's later anarchism and also strengthened her determination to live her life in her own way. At 15, her father tried to marry her off, but she refused. It was eventually agreed that she should go to America. Goldman quickly realized that for a Jewish immigrant, America was not the land of opportunity that had been promised. America, for Goldman, meant slums and sweatshops, where she earned her living as a seamstress. What originally drew Goldman to anarchism was the outcry that followed the Haymarket Square tragedy in 1886 in Chicago, after a bomb had been thrown into a crowd of police during a workers' rally for the 8-hour day. 4 anarchists were eventually hanged, convicted on the flimsiest evidence. The judge at the trial openly declared, "Not because you caused the Haymarket bomb, but because you are anarchists, you are on trial." In the early days, Goldman supported the idea of propaganda by deed. In 1892, together with her occasional lover, Alexander Berkman, she planned the assassination of Henry Clay Frick, who had suppressed strikes in the Homestead, Pennsylvania factory with armed guards. They believed that by killing a tyrant, a representative of a cruel system, the consciousness of the people would be aroused. This didn't happen. Berkman only managed to injure Frick and was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Goldman tried to explain and justify the attempted assassination, insisting that true morality deals with the motives, not the consequences. Her time in post-revolutionary Russia meant that she reassessed this belief eventually, that the ends justify the means. She was imprisoned for a second time for distributing birth control literature, but her longest sentence resulted from her involvement in setting up no conscription leagues and organising rallies against the First World War. Goldman and Berkman were arrested in 1917 for conspiring to obstruct the draft and given 2 years. Afterwards, they restricted their citizenship and deported along with other undesirable Reds to Russia. FBI Chief J. Edgar Hoover, who directed her deportation hearing, called her one of the most dangerous women in America. The plus side to deportation meant that Goldman got a free ticket to Russia, where she was able to witness the Russian Revolution firsthand. Goldman had been prepared to bury the hatchet of Marxist conflict with anarchism in the First International and support the Bolsheviks. The breaking point came in 1921, when the Kronstadt sailors and soldiers rebelled against the Bolsheviks and sided with the workers on strike. They were attacked and crushed by the Red Army. I know that in the past, every great political and social change necessitated violence. Yet it is one thing to employ violence in combat as a means of defense. It is quite another thing to make a principle of terrorism, to institutionalize it to assign the most vital place in the social struggle. Such terrorism begets counter-revolution, and in turn itself becomes counter-revolutionary. At the age of 67, Goldman went to Spain to join the struggle of the Spanish Revolution. She told a rally of libertarian youth, "Your revolution will destroy forever the notion that anarchism stands for chaos." Not only have women always been a part of history, but they've always been a huge part of revolutionary history. This isn't just about Emma Goldman, though I use her as an example because she's so prolific, but you only have to look at Rosa Luxemburg, the women fighters of the YPG in northeast Syria, Krupskaya, the anti-apartheid forces of the ANC, and on and on. So, even if you want to make the argument that, yes, obviously women played a part in human history, obviously these periods of conflict, these huge changes, these pressure points that are depicted in a series like Assassin's Creed that tend to focus on points of historical struggle as an excuse to shoehorn in their Assassin-Templar conflict, they won't involve enough women to justify their inclusion in these stories. Well, again, we have always fought. Huge women's marches were the impetus for major revolutions in France and Russia. Mexican women fought police in the streets for the right to abortion in recent years, and even something like Stonewall was fought by a large contingent of butch lesbians and trans women. Angela Davis exists. Sata fucking Shakur. Some of the most important revolutionaries of the modern era were women. Should that not be enough proof? Women's history is history. There weren't two parallel streams of ongoing stories where men fought and women did other bullshit. Never the twain shall meet. And if we're going to be telling stories about history, even in fiction, we need to be honest about that and paint a picture that tells the whole, complete truth. Not just a fairy tale men tell themselves to prevent them from thinking too much about how patriarchy shapes their past, and by extension, their present. Thanks for watching. Hey, so this was a long one. Turns out, if you want me to write about something that I've always had on my list, such as We Have Always Fought and the history around that, I've been meaning to make a essay with my thoughts on that essay for a long, long time. You just to find a way to connect it to one of my ongoing special interests. So thank you so much if you watched this to the end. And especially thank you to all my patrons and those who donate to me on either Coffee or PayPal at Brigitte Empire or Catherine Strickson at gmail.com. That's BRIGITTEMPIRE on Coffee, or CATHERINESTRICKSON at gmail.com on PayPal, respectively. It's just been my birthday, so if you want to give me a present, you can give me a little gift there. Also, I don't have much money and this is all my income, so if you want, or if you just feel inclined, or if you know, if that money's burning a hole in your pocket, I would love to use it to pay my groceries. Because groceries are getting more expensive and my pay is not increasing in line with inflation, obviously. Anyway, for those of you who tried this stuff before, you know what it's like, so bear with me. But if you can, I would love your support. But even better than paying me on Coffee or PayPal, you know, you could sign up to my Patreon. And if you do, you can get early access to all my videos. You get exclusive content, such as my interviews with Jessie Gender, Princess Weeks, and Rosenkreutz. That Jessie Gender one's from a video that hasn't come out yet, so even more exclusive. You get to join the patrons Discord, you get my Nintendo Switch friend code, and any discounts on future merchandise, as well as, you know, the honor, the absolute gift, the prestige of having me read your name out at the end of each video. Just like all of these wonderful people who should all be modeling themselves after. Shield Vaden, Robin Podolsky, Infernal Ramblings, Exploding Turtle, Casual Observer, Terry Roberts, Manta Ray, Courtney Burmack, Sleepy Slug, Philippa Toporoga, Soma Piglet, Meredith Matthews, 4IS, Artie Wolf, Hayden Gaylor, Greg Noble, No Kings, Only Fools, Deanna McMillan, Caroline Regalado, Alexandra Lilly, Jay Peterson, Howard Lott, Lara Van Loon, Nerenia, Scarjan, and Joey Cobalt. Thank you all for supporting me. This was a lot of fun for me. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it too. Thank you so much. I love you. Have a lovely week. Keep on whistling. I'm gonna turn this off now before I ramble more.
I come bearing gifts.
We're saved! Today, These women grieved for their sons, and these men worked the wall. But tonight, we forget all of that. Let's have some fun! What do you say? Care to join us?
Time for some fun. You'll have to help me strip off these uncomfortable Athenian robes.
Gladly. If you like, we can feed them to the goat.
There's another goat?
Much like you, I am an activist of sorts.
You've got the look of a man who wants something.
Indeed. You've done more for London citizens lately than any endeavor has accomplished in a decade. But those citizens were already well provided for. I challenge you both to help those who really need your assistance, the working people.
An interesting challenge. We accept.
Shouldn't we at least talk about these things for... Sod it. We accept.